Okay, so we're going to continue here from where we left off. My recorder seemingly crashed again. But basically we clicked that link at the bottom of the articles page, and I was pointing out the fact that if you look at the URL, how it says articles/new, and then you come here and you have this form up, and just like we saw in that file, notice that we create a label, what's it for, and then it also has a name. Notice the syntax here. It also generates all this stuff automatically, once again, by virtue of doing those generate commands where we do the scaffolding. All that's created for us. All right, so this is just a dump of the file. There's no edits that are happening here. Okay, we're just taking a look. So there's nothing you actually need to code at this point, which maybe is a little bit of a relief, I'm guessing. Right. So notice how the author does exactly the same thing that I'm doing. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is some of the stuff that's kind of passed along with it. Notice that there is some inline CSS that gets thrown in. Notice the form tag itself has some like weird stuff thrown in there, including the character set, the action. What does the action do? Well, once you hit the button, it takes you back to the articles page. That's all that's doing. The data is being sent through a post. It also sends a little token here. Notice this is a hidden form field to basically identify the transaction that's happening, to give it kind of a unique identifier. That's automatically generated. All right, now we talked a little bit about helpers before, but there are helpers that are specifically designed to work with forms. You can see basically the two types that we have. There's a form helper that is aware of the stuff that's going on with all the database components, all the active record stuff. And then we also have one that helps with the output. In other words, helps us to put together our HTML tags and attributes and everything. Not too much more I want to say about that. And they actually have a little link to an article on W3 about the whole thing. All right, and there's certain, best practices that, when you do form building, and I think you should have learned about them, when you were learning HTML, but you might need to review this section if you haven't. Some of the different form things that we can do are these. So we're really calling upon things that you should already know about. There's clearly more than this, but these are the ones that they're just demonstrating here. So, oh yeah, and basically the whole point is that any of these can be added to any of our URLs to help trigger some of these actions. And okay, so what I'm looking at here, actually, if you guys want to try this, it says go back to your form, and when you submit it, make sure your server's still running. Click the Create Article button. You see an error, right? You don't get that error? All right, well, let's see if I do. You know why I got it? Because I didn't type anything into the form. You did. Well, then your validation's probably not working correctly, is my guess. All right. So really what this is doing is it's looking at all the, remember when we did like has to, has many, belongs to, all that kind of stuff? And then validates the presence of, that type of thing, all that validation, and all those linking things that we did with Active Record. And what it does automatically with CSS to identify problems, and also generates messages. Some of these are default messages that are automatically created, and that's why you always want to use names for things that make sense, because can't be blank is automatic and must exist is automatic. It's not something that I programmed it to do. All right, the next thing they're directing us to do is, as a result of what just happened, as your web server is running, and you should still have that window open, you're going to see that every time something goes down in the browser, the web server keeps a running log. So it keeps track of all the things that are going on. And it shows what's happening. And you guys should be familiar with this from the last chapter, where it tried to do a transaction and it rolled it back because it had validation problems, right? So it tried to do it, but it didn't do it. And then what it does, you know, is it tries to render the form again, but it renders it with a different layout, and basically a layout that includes all the error messages. All right, so that's just, you know, understanding what the server output is. All right, the other thing that that we can do here is try a command like this. Now notice this command has a get statement in it. You should be able to recognize that by the question mark indicating that the get's beginning, and then key value pairs, title equals Rails, a delimiter, a little separator basically, which is the ampersand, and then another key value pair. So if you go ahead and just click this and see what happens, what happens? I'm getting a little hourglass here. That's a little disturbing, right? Did it work for you guys? And what's... All right. The whole point is not what that's doing, but what you should be looking at is what the server is doing. And what they're trying to show you is that you're passing parameters, and that appears as a hash inside the server somewhere, and namely right here. See that? And that's really kind of the whole point of that little section. All right. Once again, we're going to go back to this controller. So we're going to go to ApptControllers, Articles Controller. I think that should be open in the editor unless we closed it. We have Apps Controller, Article Controller. All right. All right, so the thing that we're wanting to do is actually do create. So if you actually go into that file and look at the create section, that's what they want us to focus on here. All right, so really what they want us to look at here, I mean, you can look at it either in your file or right here in the book, is that they're showing us that now we see how parameters are sent. Now we can see what would happen to them when they're received by the application. So what happens is we take those parameters that are passed, and it intelligently, notice that it doesn't like have a particular listing of what those parameters are. Basically the parameters that are possible are all the parameters that match up with all the columns in the table or the model that we're working with. So we don't really need to specify them. That's why we're able to take these key value pairs. And what parameters are you passing? Well, we're passing title and we're passing body. We could also pass like ID or you know, user or whatever the other fields are. So it kind of intelligently adapts to it. All right. Now there's another part of that file, and in this case it's in the private section, and this is the part that actually looks at those parameters, and that's, notice right here, this actually points us to this method. And notice part of what it does here is says parameters require. So what is required is that we have to have an article, And then we can also allow, or basically permit, title, location, excerpt, body, and published at to be passed as well. But we require that article is passed. An article is basically the name of the article itself. Now, the other thing that we have here is, notice that they're now taking us over to the show HTML file. So if you want to bring that one up, I forget if we opened it already. But the reason we have this little notice field here is so that if any errors are generated, that's where they're going to be placed. And that's why it's called notice. It's really kind of the whole point of that little bit. So if something fails, it will push an error message and it will go to notice. The other thing that's kind of interesting is if you do generate errors, you'll notice that it automatically takes those form elements that it's highlighting and doing all that weird CSS to, and it applies the class of field with errors, and that's what pushes the CSS to change the color. So if you want to see how that works now, let's try a different folder. We go to App, Assets, Style Sheets. So App, Assets, Style Sheets. Once again, these are not things that we created. These are automatically generated. And then we're looking at Scaffold CSS, SCSS. So now we're going to learn another new technology. Are you guys ready for this? Throwing a lot of new stuff at you real quick. So this is just standard looking CSS, correct? Not really too hard to figure out. And if you scroll down somewhere in here, you'll see that notice has predefined a green color. Notice that field with errors, that class that we were just looking at, well, that gives you padding, it gives you the color red, and it puts it in a table, and etc. But the interesting part is this file extension, the SCSS. That's something you guys probably have not seen before. And in essence, what's going on here is a similar approach to what we see with the embedded Ruby file. And in this case, notice that we don't have that extra little file extension here. And what's happening is, this is a modification from version to version again, is an SCSS file is a way to write short code that then generates to CSS. Now, you guys have already seen how like PHP and ASP and now Ruby are able to embed code into an HTML file that then executes and then becomes HTML in the browser. SCSS is a CSS equivalent to that. So you write basically a different type of code that pushes CSS to the browser to render as CSS. So you guys catching my drift here? This is a little bit of a step forward from your comfort zone probably, but it's a very popular technology that's growing really, really fast. Now, what they're trying to do here is just kind of show you how those errors are pushed. That's really kind of the whole point of that section. So it's really kind of doing that automatically. So if something does happen that's bad, it will trigger errors. When it triggers errors, it's going to end up doing, running that CSS and generating it, making it red, and redrawing the page and all that kind of stuff. And then if something succeeds, they use the notice and they put up the message in green. Green is good, red is bad, that type of thing. All right. So one of the things they want us to do now is go back to the browser in our application and actually try to edit one of the articles that we have. So I'm going to grab one of these. I'm just going to click Edit. and they want us to try to change it. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'm going to hit Update Article. And you see I'm getting an error message here. So it says, one error prohibited this article from being saved. The user must exist. It's probably not what's going on in the book, I'm sure. But once again, the real goal here is to have you look at the output and what's happening in the background. And what's happening in the background is we are passing parameters again. Notice all these tokens being passed. And then they're looking for this to be edited, and it's going to try to push it, but it's rolling it back because it is throwing some sort of an error. Now, whether or not that's by intention, we're not really quite sure. So I'm going to pull out my friendly little SQLite browser tool, because I'm guessing that part of what's happening is I'm messing with an article that requires it to have a user, but I don't have a user. So let's see if that's actually the case. So we're going to go in. And let's look at some of the tables here. And we were editing an article, right? All right, and there you go. See, so here's the problem. In my database, notice the user IDs for these here are all null. But we set up rules that need that not to be null. So that creates a little bit of a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just dump in some user IDs here. And I'm assuming, of course, that these user IDs are valid too. So probably not a bad idea. So I got a 1, 3, and a 4. So I'm going to go back here. Might as well give a couple of them to 3. Then you have to remember with this tool that you have to click this Write Changes for it to actually save. So now if I go back to my browser, and probably the thing to do, let's just actually reload this. And then type in Racine again, update article, and now it succeeded. Okay, so this is generated by the notice. The red that I got was from error. Okay, so I unintentionally showed that one too. All right, so here's a little micro quiz. You guys should know this. What is the acronym DRY stand for? Wasn't it on your midterm? It stands for not wet, right? No, it stands for don't repeat yourself. So don't write code that's redundant. Right? Now it sounds familiar? Yeah. So one of the things that happens is to take a look at these two files. We have new HTML ERB. Let's see if we have that open already. New HTML ERB. And then we also have apps, views, users, edit. Let's take a look at that one. App, views, users, edit. Where's users? We don't have it. We must have skipped a command somewhere. Can you say? All right, so one thing I just did is I was just trying to make sure that we didn't miss a step somewhere, and fortunately I don't think we have. And we were on page 148, guys, right? Okay, and I'm sorry for all the scrolling in the video. This must be very exciting to watch. But the point is, they're having us look at basically what they're trying to show us is that here we have a command that's in essence seemingly doing the same thing in these two different files, but it really is it's not the point that it's not really repeating, because the point is that it's relative to the item that we're working with. So if you're going to look for this particular file, you're not going to find it because we did not create it. Right. And I think that's really what the problem is. So this I should probably highlight this. And I remember this from last time, actually. Users should be articles. Right, so that's a little note I'm making here for the future. All right, and once again, the whole point is to look at this, because what is it rendering the form from? It's rendering it automatically based upon what we're throwing in. So if we're working with articles, it's automatically generating that. There's no real need to write all the code that renders the form here. You just call the one command, which is a separate little piece. That's really the concept here. All right, so this concept of bringing in a little piece is kind of like include in PHP once again, and that's why they're calling it a partial. So it's not a whole page, it's not a whole application, it's not a whole class file. It's just a little snippet of code that we're pulling in so that we don't have to write it over and over and over again. And that also allows you to actually create names for things that have certain values. So you can have it pull in a value automatically as well. If you want to render something that's an object, the syntax is a little different. You just include the @ sign at the beginning, and you alter the declaration a little bit. If you have a whole bunch of partials, when it's a collection, you can basically refer to it as an object and then loop through it, doing basically a for each, and then it renders that object in pieces. All right, folks, so that basically is Chapter 7. And then we're moving on to Chapter 8, but we are basically done for the night here. We're out of time. So your objective is to move on to Chapter 8 and do the coding that's involved, and you'll see that there's actually stuff to do there. So Chapter 7 was much more about learning about the concepts. So now I'm hoping as you're working on the Chapter 8 stuff, please use the videos that were pre-recorded from last year, because we're kind of a little behind the curve time-wise. And I'm hoping as you're working now you get a little bit more of a picture of what the stuff that you're manipulating. All right, we'll see you next time.